it was like a dream come true. You know, it was like a dream at the time to actually, well, of course, I thought about it.
Freddie Mercury stood in front of the camera, thinner than ever. His once bold frame, now wrapped in a frail, sleeveless vest, hand-painted with the faces of his beloved cats. The scene was filmed in black and white, by choice. It wasn't just for style, it was to hide the truth. The truth that his body was failing faster than anyone wanted to admit. But even then, he smiled, that unforgettable smile. And then, at the end of the take, he leaned in, eyes sharp but sunken, and whispered to the lens, "I still love you." For fans around the world, it was a beautiful goodbye, a final moment of grace. But what they didn't know, what even some of his closest companions didn't fully see, was just how much pain he was masking, just how far he was from the electrifying figure who once commanded entire stadiums with a single glance. Freddie Mercury wasn't just sick, he was slipping away, quietly, rapidly, and heartbreakingly. This is the story behind that smile, behind that whisper, behind the final days of a man who lived like a god, on stage, but died in a shadow he tried to shield from the world. A shadow deeper and darker than many can bear to hear. The story you thought you knew. That's just the surface. The tribute concerts, the news clips, the memorials, they all touched on the legend, but not the torment. Because Freddie Mercury wasn't just a frontman, he was a fighter, and even as his body broke down, he never let the world see him bend. There were no public tears, no dramatic confessions, just work, just music, just the mission to finish what he started. But that drive came at a price, a brutal private price that few outside his inner circle ever witnessed. He didn't want your pity, he wanted your applause. So he kept the pain hidden. The blood, the blindness, the nights when he couldn't walk from one room to the next. Locked away behind closed doors and studio walls. Try not to gasp. Because once you know what really happened in those final days, you'll never hear his songs the same way again. And yet, as haunting as it was, Freddie's goodbye wasn't one of defeat. That whisper wasn't fear. It was love. Pure, deliberate, defiant love. The kind that lives beyond time, beyond illness, beyond death. But that final whisper wasn't the end. It was just the final act in a story even his closest friends couldn't bear to speak. Before the world knew him as Freddie Mercury, he was Farrokh Bulsara, a shy boy with a peculiar mouth and a piano teacher who saw something most couldn't. Born in 1946 in Stone Town, Zanzibar, Farrokh was surrounded by warmth, tradition, and a quiet kind of privilege. His father worked as a high-ranking cashier for the British Colonial Office. The family had status, comfort, and stability in a place where most didn't. Their home was filled with music, prayer, and the scent of spice carried on the ocean breeze. Farrokh's early life was one of balance, strict Zoroastrian customs on one hand, and the imaginative stirrings of a boy who was already dreaming far beyond his island. At 8, his parents made a difficult choice. They sent him to St. Peter's, a British-run boarding school in Panchgani, India, where the rules were rigid, the uniforms stiff, and the days tightly measured by bells. But it was there, in that hillside town outside Mumbai, that something extraordinary began. The headmaster noticed Farrokh's nimble fingers and begged his parents to pay for piano lessons. It was a small decision, just a few extra rupees a month, but it opened a door. The boy took to the instrument like he'd been born for it. He played by ear. He played with feeling. Music for him became not just an activity, but an escape. When he sat at a piano, the awkwardness of his overbite disappeared. So did the distance from home. So did the pressure to be something he wasn't. He joined a school band called the Hectics at just 12. They played covers of Elvis and Little Richard. Farrokh played piano, occasionally sang, and soaked in every sound. His classmates gave him a nickname, Bucky, for his teeth. He never fought it. He just smiled wider. In the classroom, he was quiet. On stage, he was something else entirely. But life has a way of testing the bold too early. In 1964, at the age of 17, Farrokh returned to Zanzibar just as the tides of violence began to rise. What started as political unrest exploded into a bloody revolution. Thousands of Arabs and South Asians, people like his family, were killed in a matter of days. The Bulsaras fled, no time to pack, no time for tears. Just one suitcase and a rushed goodbye to everything they had ever known. The move to England wasn't graceful, it was survival. Cold grey skies replaced the tropical warmth. The laughter of friends was gone. Farrokh was now a refugee in a suburb called Feltham, where dreams didn't float on ocean air. They sank beneath concrete silence. He had lost his country, his innocence, and the only version of himself he had ever known. He left behind the sun, the sand, and the boy he once was. England was cold, but Farrokh Bulsara burned with a heat that wouldn't go out. While the world around him tried to mold him into something quiet, something safe, he was already sketching who he really was. He enrolled at Ealing Art College, officially to study graphic design. But it wasn't the canvas that drew him in. It was the rhythm of rock, the hum of possibility in every guitar riff echoing from the walls of London's underground clubs. It was at Ealing that he began shedding his past like an old skin. The name Farrokh became Freddie. The accent softened. The walk changed. He studied not just music, but how to be music. He didn't want to just sing like Hendrix. He wanted to command like him. He didn't just admire Elvis. He studied the way his hips moved, the way crowds reacted to every wink and breath. Freddie wasn't looking for applause. He was hunting for transformation. And he knew he wasn't like the others. Not just musically. He carried something he couldn't say out loud. A private truth about who he loved and how he saw the world. It wasn't safe to speak it in public. So instead, he stitched it into the seams of his clothes, into the way he played, into the drama, the movement, the shimmer. If he couldn't be open, he would be bigger. His first real shot came with a band called Ibex in 1969. He jumped in fast, learned their entire set in a matter of days, and hit the road. They played small venues, mostly pubs and dusty theaters, but Freddie acted like every stage was Wembley. He brought energy they didn't know they needed. Within weeks, he'd renamed the band Wreckage and started slipping in original songs. It was raw, clumsy, and short-lived. The band fell apart, but Freddie didn't flinch. Next came Sour Milk Sea. Another flash, another fizzle. But each failure sharpened his hunger. He was looking for something grand, something loud, something that could carry the weight of everything he couldn't say out loud. And then it happened. On March 29th, 1970, his old art college friend Tim Staffel left his band Smile. Freddie didn't wait, he stepped in. Smile was already talented, Brian May on guitar, Roger Taylor on drums, but they were just musicians. Freddie had a vision. He wanted more than a sound. He wanted spectacle. He pushed them to dress louder, act bigger, and dare to dream beyond the clubs. He gave them a new name, Queen. At first, they laughed. Queen? Wasn't that too much? Too bold? But Freddie smiled. He said it was perfect, regal, provocative, unforgettable, just like he planned to be. He wasn't just creating a band, he was building a kingdom. Queen didn't just rise, they erupted. The music scene in the early 70s had never seen anything quite like them. At the center was Freddie Mercury, now fully transformed, commanding attention with every flick of his wrist, every explosive note that tore from his throat. With songs like Killer Queen, Queen announced their arrival, glamorous, clever, unapologetic. And with Bohemian Rhapsody, they didn't just play a song, they rewrote the rules. 6 minutes of operatic madness, no chorus, piano, ballad, opera, hard rock, all fused into one unlikely masterpiece. Executives said it wouldn't work. DJs said no one would play it. But Freddie didn't care. He pushed through. He convinced the band to film a simple video and fought for it to be released exactly as it was. The gamble paid off. The song sat at #1 for 9 weeks. It wasn't just a hit. It was a cultural shift. From there, it only grew louder. We are the champions. Somebody to love. Don't stop me now. Queen became an anthem machine, with Freddie as the conductor, the magician, the ringmaster in sequins. But behind that glittering curtain, something else was happening, something darker. Because while Queen looked like rock royalty, they were living like peasants. Their first contracts were a trap. They were selling out venues, topping charts, and still struggling to pay rent. Trident Studios, the company managing them, kept the money flowing in one direction, away from the band. At one point, John Deacon couldn't even qualify for a mortgage. Freddie was living in a damp London flat, with barely enough for groceries, let alone glam. They worked through the night, often recording at off hours when bigger names weren't using the studio. They lived in limbo, famous but powerless. And all the while, Freddie pushed harder, bigger costumes, bolder sounds, more theatrics. He wasn't just making music, he was performing a version of himself that the world would accept. And yet, the louder the crowd screamed, the lonelier he sometimes felt. He wore masks long before anyone knew he was sick. He played with gender, identity, style, but always kept a veil over the parts of himself that felt unsafe in the spotlight. In interviews, he dodged questions with a smile. In lyrics, he dropped hints like breadcrumbs, but the truth stayed locked behind that larger-than-life persona. Then, just as Queen was finally winning legal freedom from Trident, they made their riskiest move yet. A night at the opera, 7 studios, massive budgets, all or nothing. Freddie brought in Bohemian Rhapsody and told them, this is it. If it flopped, it was over. If it worked, they would be untouchable. It worked. They weren't just stars, they were kings. But no crown is without weight. And while Freddie's voice was stronger than ever, and the world finally bowed to his brilliance, there was one thing he couldn't command. He finally ruled the stage, but his body was already beginning to betray him. By the mid-1980s, something in Freddie Mercury had begun to shift, but not on stage. On stage, he was still a thunderbolt in motion, strutting across arenas with that broken mic stand like a weapon in his hand. The crowds were still deafening. The outfits still sparkled. But behind closed doors, something was wrong. At first, it was subtle. A cough here, a cancelled appearance there. Freddie had always been private, but now he started vanishing even from those closest to him. Assistants noticed the weight loss. Friends saw how often he was tired. There were days he couldn't keep food down, nights when he simply lay in bed with the curtains drawn. His energy flickered like a dying light bulb, on one day, off the next. The band said nothing. They saw the signs. They had eyes. But within Queen, there was an unspoken rule. If Freddie didn't bring it up, no one asked. Not even Roger. Not even Brian. It was easier to believe it was stress, exhaustion, burnout. They told themselves it was nothing. They had to, because the truth was too terrifying to say aloud. Reinhold Mack, their longtime producer, would later say that Freddie began to pull away during this time, not just physically, but emotionally. He stopped confiding. He kept conversations light. He laughed when he should have cried. Mack put it simply. He didn't want us to see him shrink and die. And so, Freddie built a wall made of jokes, studio sessions, and vodka. In public, he denied everything. Tabloids speculated. Whispers grew louder. But Freddie met them all with wit and charm. He brushed off the rumors like lint on a velvet jacket. "I'm as fit as a fiddle," he'd say. And then he'd walk off, tired, coughing, hiding. Even his voice, that impossible voice, began to show strain. He could still hit the notes, but he paid a higher price each time. There were no press conferences, no admissions. Freddie Mercury was not going to let the world watch him unravel. He'd spent his life crafting an image, larger than life, bold, defiant, untouchable. Letting people see him weaken would shatter that illusion. And for Freddie, illusion was protection. It was armor. But in the studio, something was changing. The lyrics grew darker, more introspective. Songs like "Who Wants to Live Forever" didn't feel like performance anymore. They felt like confession. Every word held weight. Every line felt closer to the edge. Still, the work continued. Freddie kept showing up. Sometimes he could only sing for an hour or two. Sometimes he pushed through the pain like it wasn't even there. And when the band would ask if he wanted to stop, he'd smile and say, "No, darling, let's keep going." He never said it, not once, but they all knew. He was still performing, but already preparing to disappear. There are some things even the brightest spotlight never touches. For all his fame, his chaos, his pageantry, Freddie Mercury was a man of deep privacy. Behind every flamboyant outfit, behind every booming vocal run, was someone who guarded his heart like a vault. And now, decades after his death, it seems that vault may have been left open, but only for one person. In 2025, a new biography sent shockwaves through the Queen fan base. Written by Leslie Ann Jones, Love, Freddie didn't just revisit his life, it introduced a revelation even those closest to him never saw coming. According to the book, Freddie Mercury had a daughter, not publicly, not legally, but biologically and emotionally very real. A girl referred to simply as B. Born in the mid-70s, allegedly the result of a discreet affair with the wife of a close friend, B grew up far from cameras, far from stages. She became a doctor. She stayed quiet. But what stunned the world even more wasn't her existence. It was what Freddie left her. 17 handwritten journals. 17 diaries filled with notes, poems, dreams, fears, memories he never spoke aloud, reflections on fame, on illness, on love. A side of Freddie Mercury the public never saw and maybe never deserved to. He didn't want those pages published. He didn't write them for applause. He wrote them for honesty, for clarity, for her. In them, Jones claims, are lines about his final days, not the press release version, the raw truth. What it felt like to watch his body collapse while the world still called him a god. What it meant to love someone when you knew your time was running out. What it meant to live, truly live, while hiding everything that made you feel alive. And maybe that's why he chose her. Not the fans, not the band, not even Mary Austin, the woman who held his ashes and guarded his memory like sacred treasure. Freddie chose B to hold his final thoughts, his real thoughts. Maybe because she wasn't part of the machine. Maybe because she wasn't tangled in the spotlight. Or maybe because she reminded him of the boy he once was. The boy who had to hide everything that mattered. No one outside that inner circle has seen the full contents of the diaries. And B has stayed completely silent. No interviews, no documentaries. Just quiet stewardship of a truth too big for the stage. But it leaves us with questions that won't go away. What do the diaries really say? Why did Freddie write them when he never liked talking about his private life? And what does it mean that the man who spent his entire life performing left his deepest truths behind in ink? He wanted the world to hear his voice, but only one person got to read his silence. But who is B? And why did Freddie give her his final words? When Freddie Mercury died on November 24th, 1991, the world stopped. Mourning swept across continents. Tributes poured in. Candles flickered at vigil sites from London to Tokyo. But as millions celebrated his legacy, one part of his story vanished, literally. Freddie was cremated at Kensal Green Cemetery in West London. It was a private ceremony, by design. No cameras, no spectacle, just a quiet goodbye, witnessed by a few close friends. And then, nothing. For over a year, his ashes remained unclaimed. People assumed he'd be memorialized with grandeur, a mausoleum perhaps, or a statue worthy of his legend. But Freddie had made it clear. He didn't want that. No shrine, no public monument, no place for the curious or the careless to gawk at what remained of him. He wanted privacy, not just in life, but in death. Eventually, it was Mary Austin, his closest companion, former lover, and the woman he once called his common-law wife, who took his ashes, quietly, without ceremony. She was the keeper of his most intimate truths. He had once left her half of his estate and told her, "If things had been different, you would have been my wife. This is for you." She honored that bond the only way he asked, by keeping his final resting place a secret. Then, in 2013, something strange happened. In a quiet corner of Kensal Green Cemetery, a small bronze plaque appeared, engraved with the name Farrokh Bulsara, along with his birth and death dates, and a short message in French. Pour toujours près de toi avec tout mon amour. Forever close to you with all my love. It was signed simply M. Fans discovered it and began to gather. Whispered theories spread like wildfire. This was the spot. This was where he lay. But as quickly as it appeared, the plaque was removed. No explanation, no statement, just gone. Some say Mary had it taken down to preserve the secret. Others believe it was never meant to be found in the first place. Either way, it reinforced what Freddie had once said in one of his final conversations. "My fans gave me everything, but they can't have this." He gave them his voice, his performance, his pain, wrapped in glitter and music. But this one thing, this last, sacred piece of him, he chose to keep away. The truth is, Freddie Mercury exists everywhere his voice is heard. In headphones, in concerts, in the anthems chanted at every stadium around the world. But where his physical remains rest, that is a mystery kept alive by love, not legend. Mary Austin has never revealed the location, not to the press, not to his bandmates, not even to Freddie's family. She holds that secret like a vow, sealed by something deeper than fame. Only one person knows where he is, and she's never told a soul. By 1990, Freddie Mercury was a man in pain, but you wouldn't know it from the music. In the studio, surrounded by the familiar hum of monitors and the quiet presence of his bandmates, he became something more than sick. He became unstoppable. The innuendo sessions were not easy. Freddie's body was deteriorating. There were days he couldn't stand for more than a few minutes. His immune system was wrecked. His vision was starting to blur. But still, he showed up. Every time. He was thin, pale, often wrapped in extra layers to stay warm in the cold London studio air. But when he stepped up to the mic, something shifted. His voice came alive. It was still full, still sharp, still Freddie. And no matter how short the session had to be, he gave it everything. Then came The Show Must Go On. It was one of the final songs the band would ever record together. Brian May had written the lyrics, pouring in all the pain and bravery he saw in Freddie's silent struggle. But as the song grew bolder, so did the questions. Could he even sing it? Could he handle the energy, the range, the defiance packed into every word? Freddie didn't hesitate. "I'll do it, darling," he said. Then he downed a glass of vodka, walked into the booth, and nailed it in one take. The engineers watched in awe. They knew what it cost him. But he didn't show it. He made jokes. He teased. He laughed when he missed a line. Even when his bones ached and his body was losing the fight, he brought levity into the room. Because the music mattered. Because that's who he was. And then came the final performance the world would ever see. These Are the Days of Our Lives wasn't just a song. It was a farewell. Filmed in May 1991, the video was intentionally shot in black and white to soften the truth. Freddie wore a vest covered in hand-drawn images of his cats, his one comfort. His eyes were sunken, his movements were slow, but he smiled. He gave take after take, whispering feedback to the crew, brushing off exhaustion, insisting on doing it right. And then, right at the end of the final cut, he looked straight into the lens and whispered, "I still love you." It wasn't a line in the song. It wasn't planned. It was a message, a parting gift. Millions would come to treasure that moment. That soft whisper from a man who'd spent decades screaming beauty into the world. But what most never knew was that he was only holding it together for the camera. Because as powerful as that moment was, it was still a performance. But that was just for the cameras. What happened at home was far harder to watch. By mid-November 1991, Freddie Mercury was no longer the figure the world remembered. The strong, strutting showman had become a shadow of himself, still elegant, still proud, but weighed down by the unstoppable advance of AIDS. He had stopped all treatment by then. No more experimental drugs, no more doctor's visits, only painkillers remained. It wasn't about giving up, it was about choosing peace. His final days were spent in the sanctuary of his home at Garden Lodge in Kensington, surrounded by silence, cats, and the few people he trusted. He could barely see. Kaposi's sarcoma had spread to his eyes. His legs were weak and ravaged with lesions. He could no longer walk without help. Sometimes he couldn't walk at all. Yet somehow, he still tried to smile when friends entered the room. Freddie never wanted pity. He never wanted to be seen as a man who needed help. So even as his body collapsed, he held on to dignity with everything he had left. Friends and caretakers recalled that he remained gracious. He told stories. He asked about others. He laughed when he could. He refused to let anyone feel sorry for him, even when the pain was visible in every breath he took. Then came November 22nd. Freddie called for his manager, Jim Beach. For years, rumors had swirled, but Freddie had stayed silent. That day, he made his choice. He dictated the exact words he wanted to share with the world. The statement was short, clear, and devastating. Following the enormous conjecture in the press, I wish to confirm that I have been tested HIV positive and have AIDS. I felt it correct to keep this information private until now to protect the privacy of those around me. The press release went out at 8 p.m. Freddie Mercury died the next evening on November 24, 1991, at exactly 6:48 p.m. His longtime assistant, Peter Freestone, later said that in those final hours, Freddie looked calm, at peace. He smiled, Peter recalled, the most relaxed he'd been in years, as though letting the world know had lifted some invisible weight from his shoulders. The mask was off. The fight was over. Across the globe, the news hit like thunder. Fans wept in the streets. Headlines blazed with his name. And for the first time, millions saw not just a legend, but a man who had fought in silence, who had suffered with grace, and who had chosen the terms of his own goodbye. It was horror and beauty all at once. A death that came wrapped in honesty. A moment that would change how the world viewed not just Freddie Mercury, but the disease he had fought. It forced conversations, broke silences, and lit a fire that could no longer be ignored. But even in death, Freddie Mercury was not done surprising the world. Freddie Mercury left the world in a way only he could. Dramatic, controlled, unforgettable. But for all the power of his performances, all the thunder of his voice, it's what he left behind that still echoes loudest. Not just the songs, not just the fame, but the mystery. In recent years, pieces of his life have surfaced like clues in a story no one was ever meant to finish. The biggest of them? A woman, now in her 40s, identified only as B. According to a new biography, released in 2025, she is Freddie's daughter. Not a rumor, not a myth. A quiet truth, born in secret and protected by silence. She lives outside the spotlight. She is not chasing cameras. She's a doctor. And most stunning of all, she holds 17 of Freddie's personal journals. 17. Handwritten, private, unpublished. They were entrusted to her before he died. Not to be shared with the world, but to preserve something deeper than fame. In those pages are reportedly his final confessions, what he feared, what he loved, what he regretted, and what he still dreamed of, even as the clock ran out. Then there are his ashes. For over a year, they sat unclaimed. Millions of fans mourned. Yet no memorial, no resting place was ever revealed. It was Mary Austin, his closest friend, who finally took them, fulfilling the one promise he asked her to keep. Never tell. She's never broken that promise. Not to the press, not to the band, not to anyone. And what about Barcelona? His operatic collaboration with Montserrat Caballé was unlike anything he had done before. It was his fantasy made real. Rock meeting opera, drama without limits. He sang to the heavens, even as his body was giving out. The title track became an anthem for the 1992 Olympics. It sounded like victory, but beneath it was a quiet truth. Freddie already knew he wouldn't live to see that moment. And maybe that's the point. Freddie Mercury wasn't just a frontman. He wasn't just Queen. He was always something more, something impossible to pin down. Larger than life, but always hiding parts of himself just out of reach. And now, decades later, those parts are starting to surface. A daughter, a plaque, a whisper, a set of journals locked away from the world. What if his greatest creation wasn't just Bohemian Rhapsody or We Are the Champions? What if it was this? The legacy no one expected. The story you're still trying to finish. Freddie didn't want a statue. He didn't want a grave for people to visit. He didn't want his pain turned into a public exhibit. He wanted to go out on his own terms, loud on stage, quiet in death, and untouchable in legend. Freddie Mercury didn't just disappear. He orchestrated his exit. And somewhere, someone still holds the final page.